My name is Lorraine Carter. I am 76 years old, and last night I walked out of my daughter's dinner party without saying a word, and drove straight to my lawyer to change my will. Hours earlier, Grace had stood at the head of my own dining table, lifted her glass and mocked me. She pointed at my cardigan and called it a rag from Grandma's grave. Laughter filled the room. So I left. And what happened after? Even the lawyer said he'd never seen a mother do something so bold. Before we continue, I'd love to know, where are you watching from today? Comment below. It wasn't always like this. The mornings in this house used to feel different. I'd wake to the sound of Henry's slippers brushing against the hardwood floor, the smell of his coffee brewing stronger than mine. Now it's only me, rising at 6, wrapping my cardigan tighter around my shoulders, and letting the kettle whistle longer than it should before I pour the water over chamomile. I sit by the window where the light is softest, knitting half a scarf that I've been working on for 3 years now. My fingers aren't as fast as they once were, but the yarn feels comforting, like something that still listens when so much else doesn't. Outside, the sparrows gather on the fence, pecking at the seeds I scatter each morning. I count them as if they're guests who still remember to show up. The tea warms my throat but never lasts. By the time I set the cup down, the steam is gone, leaving only a thin film that makes me think of the silences between Grace and me. We used to talk about everything: her friends, her teachers, her silly dreams of being a ballerina. Now her voice is clipped quick. She calls only when she needs something, never just because. I tell myself she's busy. That's what children say when they stop visiting, isn't it? I'm busy, Mom. The truth is, Henry used to warn me. Lorraine, he said once, children can love you, but if you're not careful, they'll forget how to respect you. I laughed then, never believing Grace would be that kind of daughter. Yesterday, while trimming the small patch of roses Henry planted decades ago, my neighbor Mary leaned over the fence. I saw Grace's car here last week, she said, her voice casual. Thought you'd come home early. Looked like she stayed pretty late. I smiled politely, but her words lingered. I had been away the whole week, sitting by my friend Helen's hospice bed, holding her hand through nights of shallow breathing. If Grace was here, why hadn't she told me? That evening I walked back inside and noticed something odd. My porcelain teacup, the one Henry bought me for our 25th anniversary, was chipped. I always keep it on the same shelf, polished, untouched except on quiet Sundays. But there it was, with a faint crack running down its side, like someone had used it carelessly. I tried to shake it off. Maybe I had done it myself. Maybe memory plays tricks when you're older. That's what Grace would say anyway. But as I went to fetch a blanket from the hallway closet, I noticed the door to the pantry wasn't closed. I never leave it open. My hands are too particular for that. I always hear the latch click. Inside, a few cans of soup were missing. A bottle of wine too, though I couldn't remember when I'd last bought one. I stood there longer than I should have, staring into that pantry as if it would explain itself. The air smelled faintly of vanilla candles, Grace's scent, not mine. I pressed my cardigan closer, my heart unsettled. Stop imagining things, I whispered to myself. You're just tired. But as I walked back through the kitchen, my eyes landed on something that made my breath hitch. On the counter sat a wine glass turned upside down but still warm to the touch. That was the first time I felt my house was keeping secrets from me. When I returned from Helen's hospice the following morning, the house didn't greet me the way it usually did. Normally, there's a comfort in opening my own front door. The faint smell of cedar polish, the way the afternoon light paints the hallway gold. This time I stepped in and felt an odd heaviness, as though the walls themselves were watching me. The first thing I noticed was the wine. An empty bottle of Merlot sat on the counter, its cork discarded nearby. I never drink Merlot. Henry preferred Chardonnay, and after he passed, I barely touched wine at all. My first thought was that Grace must have stopped by. My second thought was a question I couldn't shake. Why hadn't she told me? I went to the guest bathroom and found the towels damp, neatly refolded in a way I never fold them. My fingers traced the soft terry cloth, and a shiver ran through me. I opened the linen closet. 2 more towels were missing. Guess. My house had seen guests without me. Then came the ache. The antique vase Henry gave me on our 10th anniversary, blue porcelain with tiny gold filigree, was gone from the mantel. The spot where it had always stood now looked like a missing tooth in a smile. I froze there, staring at the empty space until my knees weakened. Grace arrived later that afternoon. She breezed in like wind through an open door, her phone in hand, her heels clicking fast on the hardwood. "Grace," I asked carefully, "were you here while I was away?" She didn't look up from her phone. "Oh, relax, Mom. You don't even notice half the stuff around here anymore." The words stung more than I wanted to admit. "You don't even notice." I noticed everything. Every scratch Henry made on the wood while moving furniture. Every dent in the banister from Grace dragging her school bag. Every rose bush he planted one by one. My memory wasn't slipping, not yet. I tried to keep my voice calm. "The blue vase, Henry's vase, it's missing." She sighed, finally meeting my eyes. "It was outdated. I moved it." "Don't make it such a big deal." "Outdated?" I whispered. "That vase was." "Mom, please," she cut in, her tone sharper now. "Don't turn every little thing into a tragedy. I mean, seriously, it's just clutter at this point." Her words cracked something inside me. That vase had been part of our family story, present at every Thanksgiving table, filled with sunflowers every summer. Now she dismissed it as clutter. Later that night, while putting away groceries, I noticed something else. The air smelled faintly of cologne, strong, masculine, not Henry's. It lingered near the staircase, caught in the carpet fibers. For a moment I closed my eyes, letting the scent take me back. I remembered a very different Grace, just a girl of 7, tugging at my cardigan during her first recital. She had been nervous, eyes glossy with tears. "Mom, don't let go," she whispered then. "Stay with me until I finish." I held her hand so tight that night, proud as her trembling voice filled the school auditorium. She looked at me like I was her anchor. Now, decades later, she barely looked at me at all. The next morning, as I tidied the dining table, I heard faint laughter echoing from outside. Grace was standing in the driveway with her husband, whispering something I couldn't catch. Their laughter rang sharp like glass breaking. I moved to the window, pressing my hand against the glass as if I could stop the distance forming between us. I didn't want to assume the worst, but my chest tightened as I watched them. I thought of Henry's warning again, words I brushed aside for years. "Children can love you, but if you're not careful, they'll forget how to respect you." And in that moment, watching my daughter laugh in a way that excluded me, I realized something chilling. This wasn't carelessness. This was preparation. The house smelled wrong that evening. I had been in the garden trimming Henry's roses, their sweet, earthy scent still clinging to my hands, when I stepped back inside and caught the unmistakable aroma of garlic roasting in olive oil. The kitchen lights blazed brighter than I ever kept them, and voices drifted through the hallway, low, confident, not belonging to me. When I turned the corner, I froze. My dining room, Henry's dining room, was alive with chatter. A long white tablecloth stretched across the oak table, set with crystal glasses I hadn't used in years. A vase of lilies stood in the center, replacing the faded photo of Henry the first always kept there. Candles flickered, their glow bouncing off bottles of wine and polished silverware. Grace stood at the head of the table, her back to me, directing her husband to open another bottle. She was dressed elegantly, her pearls glimmering in the candlelight. For a moment I thought perhaps she had forgotten where she was. Perhaps she thought this was her home. I cleared my throat softly. "Grace." She turned with the kind of smile you give a stranger you didn't expect to see. "Oh, Mom, you're back already. I thought you'd be at Helen's longer." My voice faltered. "This is my dinner table." She gave a dismissive laugh, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear. "Don't be so dramatic. We're just hosting a few friends. You can go freshen up if you like, maybe put on something nicer. We'll make room for you." The words didn't land softly, they landed like stones. "We'll make room for you. In my own house. At my own table." I looked around at the strangers seated there, laughing politely, their eyes sliding past me as if I were a servant who had wandered in uninvited. My hands trembled as I tightened my grip on the cardigan around my shoulders. Henry's portrait, usually above the fireplace, was gone. In its place, Grace had hung a garish abstract painting I'd never seen before. My heart dropped. It was as if she had scrubbed him from the room, from memory. Grace's husband uncorked the wine, the sharp pop cutting through my silence. The liquid poured smooth, filling glasses that clinked together in a toast I hadn't been asked to join. I stepped forward. "Grace, Why didn't you tell me you were planning this? Her eyes flicked to mine, cool and steady. Because Mom, it isn't a big deal. Don't make it one. It's just dinner. Honestly, you should be grateful. At least the house is being used. Grateful. As if my life's work, my memories, my sacrifices, were now reduced to square footage she could show off. I sank into the nearest chair, my legs heavier than I could manage. I didn't belong here. Not at the table I had polished for decades, not in the house where I had raised her. My own daughter had turned me into a guest in my home. The clinking of cutlery rang louder than it should have, each sound piercing. The scent of roasted lamb filled the air, rich and heavy, making me nauseous instead of hungry. I looked down at the plate set before me, china from my own cabinet, but arranged without care, my old lace table runner shoved aside for something new and glossy. I remembered another dinner decades ago when Grace was only 10. She had insisted on helping me set the table for Henry's birthday. Her little fingers had placed each fork crooked, her giggles echoing as I gently corrected her. She had hugged me then, flour on her cheek from the cake batter, whispering, "One day, I'll make dinners just like you, Mommy." That memory felt like a cruel joke now. One of Grace's friends leaned toward her and whispered something I couldn't hear. Grace smirked, then said aloud, "Oh, don't mind her. Mom doesn't really like these gatherings. She gets tired easily." I felt my face heat. She had reduced me to an afterthought in front of strangers, as though I were a fragile relic propped up in the corner. I rose quietly from the table, steadying myself on the back of the chair. No one stopped me, not even Grace. Their laughter continued, swallowing my silence whole. As I walked down the hallway, I glanced once more at the empty space above the fireplace where Henry's portrait had been. It was as if the house itself no longer recognized me. I whispered into the still air, "Henry, am I losing her or did she lose me first?" The only answer was the echo of clinking glasses and Grace's laughter trailing down the hall. For the first time, I felt like a stranger in my own home. The dinner stretched on like a performance in which I no longer had a role. I lingered near the doorway, trying to decide whether to endure it or retreat upstairs. But then Grace spotted me. "Oh, Mom," she called, her voice lilting, almost playful. "Why are you still in that old cardigan? Haven't you realized? It's practically a family heirloom by now, something straight from Grandma's grave." Her words fell like shards of glass, sharp and glittering in the candlelight. The room erupted with laughter. Some guests chuckled politely, others openly, while Grace's husband pressed his lips together, eyes sliding away from mine. Not one voice defended me, not even his. My hands trembled as I pulled the cardigan tighter, the knit fabric suddenly heavy on my shoulders. That cardigan wasn't just cloth. Grace herself had once painted little flowers on it when she was 7, begging me not to throw it out. Back then she had called it magic armor. Now it was her punchline. I forced my lips into something resembling a smile, though inside my chest something cracked. The scent of rosemary lamb wafted across the table, rich and suffocating. I swallowed back tears that threatened to fall right there in front of them. One of the guests leaned toward Grace and whispered, "She's sweet though, isn't she?" Grace's reply came smooth, with a practiced edge. "Sweet, yes. But Mom doesn't really keep up anymore. Sometimes I think she's stuck in another decade." The laughter returned, softer this time, like an undercurrent that wouldn't die down. I excused myself quietly, slipping from the dining room before my voice betrayed me. My feet carried me down the hallway, the sound of my heels dull against the hardwood. I felt like a ghost moving through my own home, unseen, unwanted. In the study the air was cooler. Shadows stretched across the room, the faint scent of cedar and old paper surrounding me. I ran my fingers along the mahogany desk Henry once used late at night, writing ledgers for his small business. That desk had always felt like a safe place, a center of order. Tonight it felt violated. The top drawer sat slightly open. I never left it that way. When I pulled it open, my breath caught. Papers had been shifted, stacked differently than I'd left them. And tucked between them, barely visible, was a business card I had never seen before. Ethan Weller, estate planning attorney. Grace's handwriting marked the back of it. Call Monday. Discuss deed transfer. My knees nearly buckled. She hadn't just mocked me. She had been making plans behind my back. Real plans. I gripped the edge of the desk, my nails digging into the wood. The cardigan slipped from my shoulder, and I pulled it back up, almost protectively. My chest burned not from anger, at least not yet, but from heartbreak so raw it left me trembling. I remembered the night Henry died, the way Grace had cried into my lap saying, "Don't worry, Mom. I'll take care of you." How easily promises turn into leverage. How quickly love turns into entitlement. I sank into the leather chair, staring at the card. The ticking clock on the wall grew louder, each second hammering into me. My breath came shallow, uneven. Grace's laughter still carried faintly from the dining room, each note twisting the knife deeper. I thought of calling her in, confronting her, but the words stuck in my throat. I wasn't ready. I was still too stunned, too broken. Instead, I folded the card carefully, slipping it into the pocket of my cardigan. It rested heavy there, like proof of a crime no one else wanted to acknowledge. I whispered into the empty study, "Henry, what am I supposed to do?" But the silence answered me back, the way it always does when the world has already shifted without you. What would you do if your child mocked your dignity for laughs, and behind those laughs, you found proof they were planning to take your home? That night, in the quiet of my study, I realized Grace wasn't just laughing at me. She was erasing me. I didn't sleep much that night. The laughter from dinner clung to the walls long after the guests had left, echoing faintly through the house like a stain that wouldn't wash out. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Grace's smirk, heard her words, "A rag from Grandma's grave." By dawn, I rose from bed, cardigan still wrapped tight around me, and walked to the study. Something about that desk, about the card I'd found, gnawed at me. I needed to see more, to confirm whether my worst suspicions were real. The study smelled of cedar and dust, with a hint of lavender polish from years ago. I sat in Henry's leather chair, my hands trembling as I pulled open the drawer again. The papers had been shifted more than I thought, my neat stacks broken apart, files bent. Then I saw it. Henry's old envelope. It had always been sealed, tucked carefully under his ledgers. For years I never touched it. His handwriting marked the front. For Lorraine. Private. That envelope had been sacred. A piece of him I wasn't ready to open. Until now. But when I lifted it, my heart sank. The flap had already been torn. Someone had opened it. My fingers shook as I drew out the folded pages inside. The smell of old ink and aged paper filled the air, sharp and musty. Henry's familiar script flowed across the first line. "If you are reading this, then I am no longer with you. Lorraine, you must protect what we built. Protect it from anyone who forgets the value of sacrifice." Tears blurred my vision. He had written this not just for me, but as if he knew. As if he could see Grace's future choices before I ever dared imagine them. I pressed the pages to my chest, my cardigan soaking up the tears. The chair creaked under me, like Henry's old voice sighing from the past. And then the memory came. It was winter, the year Grace turned 19. Her acceptance letter had arrived from an expensive university she dreamed of, but we couldn't afford it. Henry was gone by then, and the burden had been mine alone. I remember sitting at this very desk, staring at bills stacked high, my heart breaking. That night I took off my wedding ring, the simple gold band Henry had slipped onto my finger decades earlier, and walked to the pawn shop downtown. The clerk weighed it casually, as if it were nothing more than metal, while my hand felt suddenly bare, stripped of years of love. I sold it to pay her tuition. When I told Grace, she had cried, hugging me tight. "I'll make you proud, Mom. I'll never forget what you did for me." Those words had carried me through lonely nights, through double shifts at the diner, through every sacrifice I made. And now she had not only forgotten, she had laughed. The flashback blurred into the present, leaving me trembling in the dim light of the study. I turned back to Henry's letter. The last line caught in my throat. "If she forgets, remind her. And if she betrays, protect yourself." Below the letter, tucked between the pages, I found something else. A photocopy of our original will. My breath quickened. Henry's name, my name, everything intact. But written across the margin in Grace's handwriting was a note. "Meeting with attorney, update ownership." The card from Ethan Weller hadn't been a coincidence. Grace had already started the process. She wasn't waiting for me to die peacefully. She was preparing to push me aside while I still breathed. I clutched the papers until they crinkled in my fists. My heart thudded painfully, as though it wanted to tear out of my chest. For years I had told myself Grace was careless, busy, distracted. But this wasn't carelessness. This wasn't busyness. This was betrayal. I leaned back in Henry's chair, closing my eyes, the smell of old paper thick around me. My fingers grazed the pocket of my cardigan where I had slipped the business card the night before. It burned against my skin like a brand, a reminder that my daughter was no longer my protector. She was becoming my enemy. For a long moment I sat there in silence, listening to the clock tick. Each sound felt louder, heavier, more final. Finally, I whispered into the room. Henry, I don't think she remembers anymore. And I don't know if I can remind her. The house seemed to groan back, a hollow answer I couldn't ignore. That was the moment I knew. Grace wasn't waiting for my end. She was planning it. The next morning I tried to steady myself with the same ritual. Kettle on, chamomile steeping, seeds scattered for the birds. But even as the sparrows gathered, chirping brightly at the fence, I felt hollow. Their sounds couldn't cover the echo of Henry's letter still beating in my chest. Grace arrived just after noon. Her heels clicked across the floor like they owned the house. She didn't bother knocking, she never did anymore. I met her in the hallway, my cardigan pulled tightly, Henry's letter folded in my pocket. Grace, I said, voice trembling, I need to ask you something. She looked up from her phone, her expression mildly annoyed. What now, Mom? I swallowed hard. Were you in your father's study? Did you open his things? Her smirk was small, practiced. I mean, maybe. You don't really use that room. It's just old paperwork. Old paperwork? My voice cracked. That was your father's letter. His will. His memories. You had no right. She cut me off, her tone smooth as steel. Mom, you're overreacting. Honestly, you don't even remember half the things you keep around here. It's like you're living in a museum. Her words were meant to sting, and they did. But worse was the insinuation. That quiet, poisonous suggestion that maybe my memory couldn't be trusted. That maybe I was slipping. Grace, I whispered, my throat dry. This is my house. She tilted her head, eyes narrowing with feigned pity. Not for long, Mom. You should think about downsizing. These big places aren't meant for people your age. Don't you want something simpler? Safer? Her husband walked in just then, carrying a box of wine. He looked from her to me, then quickly away, unwilling to stand in the middle. His silence cut deeper than any words. I felt the air thicken, the smell of wine and garlic clinging to the room, suffocating. My fingers trembled as I gripped the banister. I'm not ready to leave, I said firmly. This house is mine. It was built with your father. With me. Grace's laugh was sharp, almost mocking. You say that like it matters. Houses are assets, Mom. They're not shrines. And honestly, you're only still here because we've let you. The words rang in my ears. We've let you. As if my life, my memories, my dignity were permission she could grant or withdraw. The maid entered quietly then, setting fresh linens on the sideboard. Grace turned to her, gesturing dismissively. Don't mind her, she said, nodding toward me. She gets confused sometimes. It's just age catching up. The maid glanced at me with an awkward smile, unsure how to respond. The humiliation burned hotter than any insult Grace had ever given me in private. She had turned me into a frail old fool in front of someone else, in my own house. I opened my mouth, but the words stuck in my throat. My chest tightened, my hands shook against the banister. I saw Grace's eyes flick toward me, sharp with something that wasn't worry but triumph. She had made her point. For a moment I remembered another hallway years earlier. Grace had run down it in her prom dress, twirling with laughter, her hair pinned high. She had asked me, "Do I look beautiful, Mom?" And I had said with tears in my eyes, "You've never looked more beautiful." That memory, once sweet, now soured. Because the girl in that hallway was gone. In her place stood a woman colder, sharper, one who didn't hesitate to cut me down where others could hear. I steadied myself against the banister, forcing the words out. "Grace, you're not my little girl anymore. I don't recognize who you are." She shrugged, unbothered. "Then maybe you're the one who's changed." Her husband said nothing. The maid left silently. The silence that followed was louder than shouting. I climbed the stairs slowly, each step heavier than the last. By the time I reached the top, my breath was shallow, and my vision blurred with tears. From the landing, I looked back down. Grace stood in the hallway below, scrolling on her phone, laughing softly at something her husband whispered. She didn't look up. She didn't even notice me anymore. That was the moment I realized this was no longer my family. This was a battle I wasn't ready for. The house was silent after Grace left, but not the kind of silence that soothes. It was the kind that presses in, heavy and suffocating, reminding you that you are alone. I sat in the study for hours, Henry's letter folded in my hands, the words running through me like an echo. If she forgets, remind her. If she betrays, protect yourself. The letter felt almost prophetic now, as if Henry had seen something I refused to admit until it was staring me in the face. I rose to put the letter back in its place when my eyes caught on something odd. The clock on the mantel had stopped, its hands frozen at 11:47. I lifted it, feeling its weight, and noticed a tiny key taped beneath the base. Henry was a man of secrets and small safeguards. My hands trembled as I peeled the key free. It was old brass, the kind that belonged to a safety deposit box. My breath caught. For a long moment I simply held it, staring. Then my mind took me back to the last night Henry was alive. The room had smelled faintly of medicine and rain. I sat beside him, my hand clasped around his, listening to the steady but weakening rhythm of his breath. He looked at me with those tired but steady eyes and whispered, "Lorraine, promise me one thing." I leaned close, trying not to cry. "Anything, Henry. Promise me you'll protect yourself. Even if it means protecting yourself from her." His fingers squeezed weakly, but his words burned strong. "She's your daughter, but if love blinds her, you can't let it blind you too." Tears had spilled down my cheeks. "Don't talk like that. Grace loves us. She'll never." But his eyes closed then, too heavy to keep open, his hand slipping from mine. He never finished the sentence. And I never forgot the way he said it. Now, years later, holding that brass key, his warning echoed louder than ever. I drove into town the next morning, my cardigan buttoned tight, the key hidden in its pocket. The bank teller looked surprised when I presented it, but within minutes I was led to a quiet, sterile room with a single box waiting. My hand shook as I opened it. Inside were neatly stacked documents, trust forms, copies of deeds, legal instructions. And on top, a sealed envelope with Henry's handwriting again. "Lorraine, this is for when silence is no longer safety." I opened it slowly, the paper crackling. His words were simple, clear, and devastating. "If Grace ever turns against you, the trust is yours alone. I left clauses she cannot undo. Do not fear using them. Protect yourself. Protect the house. Protect your dignity." I pressed the letter to my chest, inhaling the faint scent of ink and paper. The tears that came this time weren't from grief. They were from something sharper, harder. A realization that the man I had loved had prepared me for this moment, even when I hadn't been willing to believe it could come. I walked out of that bank with the envelope tucked securely in my bag, the weight of it like armor. When I returned home, Grace's car was already in the driveway. My stomach twisted, but I forced myself inside. She was in the kitchen, sipping coffee as though it were her home. She looked me up and down and smiled. "Mom, you should really think about moving. I've been talking to a realtor. Just exploring options." "Options?" I asked, my voice colder than I intended. "Yes," she said smoothly. "These places don't stay valuable forever. You could sell now, live comfortably in a nice facility. Somewhere safe." Facility. The word stung. She wasn't just planning to push me out of my house. She was planning to tuck me away like an old book no one reads anymore. I gripped the counter, the scent of coffee bitter in my nose. My cardigan clung to my shoulders like a shield. "Grace," I said quietly, "you're moving too fast." She smirked, her tone condescending. "No, Mom. You're just moving too slow." Her husband entered, setting his hand gently on her shoulder, but his silence betrayed everything. He wasn't stopping her. He was standing with her. Against me. That moment broke something inside me that would never be repaired. I turned away from them both, retreating to the study once more, closing the door behind me. I set Henry's documents on the desk and stared at them through blurred vision. The air was thick, the ticking clock mocking me even though its hands hadn't moved. And in the stillness, one truth became painfully clear. I had been waiting for Grace to come back to me, for the little girl who painted flowers on my cardigan, who once promised to take care of me. But she wasn't coming back. She was gone. And in her place stood someone willing to erase me while I was still alive. Henry had left me a way out. All I had to do now was decide if I was strong enough to take it. The next days passed like a blur, though I wouldn't call them days so much as battles. Every ordinary act, pouring tea, folding laundry, watering the roses, felt like an act of resistance. I was no longer simply tending my home. I was guarding it. Grace, however, seemed to grow bolder. She visited more often, moving through the rooms like she was inspecting inventory. Her heels clicked against the hardwood as if each step confirmed ownership. I noticed the way her husband lingered near the study, glancing at the locked drawers, the mantel clock I'd quietly repaired. They thought they were circling prey. They didn't realize I had already found my claws. One evening, Grace announced casually over dinner, "I've been talking with a realtor. She says homes like this don't stay valuable forever. If we sold now, you could live comfortably for the rest of your life." I set my fork down slowly. "Grace, I am already living comfortably here." She rolled her eyes, the gesture sharp as a slap. "Mom, you're missing the point. This isn't practical anymore. You need something safer." "Safer," I repeated. The word tasted bitter like vinegar on my tongue. Her husband cleared his throat. "She only means smaller. Easier for you to manage." I looked between them, the clink of cutlery echoing in the silence. My chest felt heavy, but my voice came steady. "This house was built with your father. It is not a burden. It is my home. And I am not ready to be managed." The table fell quiet. Grace's jaw tightened. That night, after they left, I walked to Henry's study and pulled the brass key from my pocket. The documents from the safety deposit box lay before me, Henry's handwriting still fresh in my mind. "Protect yourself. Protect your dignity." My hands no longer trembled. They moved with purpose. The next morning, I made an appointment with Mr. Hensley, our family's old attorney. He was retired now, gray-haired and slower in his step, but his mind was sharp as ever. When I slid Henry's documents across his desk, he adjusted his glasses and studied them carefully. "Your husband was wise," he murmured. "He built clauses into the trust that give you full protection. No one, not even Grace, can force a transfer without your consent." Relief washed through me like sunlight breaking through storm clouds. For the first time in weeks, I exhaled without pain. "But," he continued, tapping his pen thoughtfully, "if you truly want to protect yourself, you should consider revising your will. Make it clear. Make it unshakable." The words hung in the air like a challenge. I stared at the papers, at Henry's neat handwriting, and then I nodded. "Yes," I whispered. "It's time." We spent hours drafting, revising, locking every line into place. My estate, my assets, my wishes, they would no longer be Grace's playground. I transferred the house into a protected trust, with instructions that bypassed her completely. And then, for the first time, I wrote a different name beside the word beneficiary. It wasn't Grace. By the time I left his office, the sky had darkened. I walked slowly to my car, the air sharp with autumn chill. My cardigan whipped lightly in the wind, but instead of holding me down, it felt lighter, like a cloak I chose to wear, not one I was trapped inside. That night, as I brewed tea, I noticed the steam lingered longer, curling into the air like a quiet signal. I lifted the cup to my lips and felt warmth spread through me, steady and sure. For weeks my tea had gone cold in my hands, untouched. Now I drank it hot. I sat by the window watching the streetlights glow, and realized the shift inside me. I was no longer waiting for Grace to change. I was changing the game myself. "Tell me, if the child you sacrificed everything for began planning your erasure, would you forgive them, or would you quietly take back your power?" The papers were signed. My will was rewritten. What Grace didn't know was that the house she was already claiming had slipped through her fingers. The silence in the house had grown deceptive. It looked calm. Sunlight pouring through the lace curtains, birds tapping gently at the feeder, the faint hum of the refrigerator. But beneath it I could sense something shifting. Silence was no longer safety. It was planning. Grace arrived one afternoon with her husband, both of them dressed too sharply for a casual visit. Their laughter carried into the kitchen, brittle and practiced. I lingered upstairs, cardigan wrapped tight around me, listening as their voices echoed faintly through the vents. At first it was harmless chatter, talk about work, about friends. But then Grace's tone sharpened, her words slipping through the air like knives. "She's getting worse," she said. "Half the time she doesn't even notice things. Yesterday she asked me twice if I wanted coffee, like she forgot she'd already asked. It's time." My chest tightened. Her husband murmured something I couldn't quite catch, and then Grace answered, voice low but clear. "We'll just tell her it's a wellness retreat. She won't know the difference once she's there. Assisted living sounds harsh, but we'll spin it. She'll accept it." I pressed my hand over my mouth to keep from gasping. Wellness retreat. Those words, dressed in honey, hiding poison beneath. Her husband hesitated. "And the house?" Grace's reply came swift, sharp, certain. "Once she's settled, we'll list it. By spring, it'll be gone." The air left my lungs in a rush. I stumbled back from the vent, my knees weak. My daughter, my flesh and blood, was plotting to exile me, to strip me not only of my home but of my dignity, disguising it as care. I sank onto the edge of the bed, the quilt heavy against my lap. My heart pounded so hard I could feel it in my fingertips. For years I had excused her arrogance, her thoughtlessness, telling myself she was just busy, just distracted. But this wasn't thoughtlessness. This was calculation. I closed my eyes and a memory surged forward. Grace as a little girl, feverish one winter night, her small body trembling with chills. I'd sat by her bed, wiping her forehead with a cool cloth, whispering lullabies until dawn. She clung to me then, whispering between tears, "Don't leave me, Mommy. Promise you'll never leave me." Now she was the one planning to leave me. Not just leave, but lock me away as though I were already gone. The betrayal cut deeper than anything before. I stood, legs shaky, but there was no tremble in my resolve this time. I walked to the study, closed the door, and sat at Henry's desk. His fountain pen lay where I had left it, its dark barrel gleaming faintly in the afternoon light. I picked it up, the weight of it solid in my hand. The pen felt like more than an object. It was Henry's voice, steady and unwavering, reminding me, "Protect yourself. Protect your dignity." I opened my notebook and began to write. Not frantic notes or scattered thoughts, but deliberate lines. What to move. What to change. Who to call. The bank, the lawyer, the realtor. The paper filled with my handwriting, neat but firm, each stroke of ink sharper than the last. As I wrote, I realized something profound. Fear had left me. The woman Grace was trying to exile was gone. In her place sat someone new. Someone older, wiser, and now unafraid. I thought of Grace's words again. She won't even know the difference once she's there. Oh, but I knew the difference. And I would show her just how wrong she was. That evening, I served them dinner as if nothing had happened. Roast chicken, green beans, mashed potatoes, simple, hearty food. I moved calmly, poured their wine, asked polite questions. Grace smiled, convinced of her control. She didn't notice the firmness in my hands as I set down her plate. She thought I was still broken. She thought I was still afraid. But inside, the fire had been lit. They thought they had silenced me. What they didn't know was that silence was my sharpest weapon. The morning after their whispered scheme, I woke before dawn. The house was still, the air cool against my skin. I wrapped my cardigan around me and sat at Henry's desk, the fountain pen still waiting. The weight of what I had overheard pressed on my chest like a stone, but beneath it something else stirred, resolve. Grace believed silence meant weakness. She was wrong. My silence was sharpening me. I began with the simplest step. I called Mr. Hensley, Henry's old attorney. My voice was calm, steady. "I need to secure the house," I said. "Not eventually. Now." He didn't hesitate. "I'll meet you this afternoon. Bring everything." Henry left. By noon I was in his office, the faint smell of old books and lemon polish wrapping around us. Mr. Hensley adjusted his glasses, scanning the documents from the safety deposit box. "Your husband was careful," he said. "This trust can be locked down tighter than Fort Knox if you wish." "Yes," I whispered, folding my hands. "That's exactly what I wish." He nodded. "Then Grace will find herself locked out, legally, permanently." The words soothed something raw inside me. For weeks I had felt like a trespasser in my own life. Now, for the first time, I felt like a protector again. When I left his office, I didn't go straight home. I drove to the small bank on Main Street and spoke with the branch manager, a kind woman named Ellen who'd known Henry. Her face softened as I explained quietly, showing her the paperwork. "We'll secure it," she assured me. "No one but you will touch this account." Her words were firm. I believed her. That night I sat at the kitchen table, sipping hot tea that stayed warm in my hands. I thought of the past weeks, the chipped teacup, the missing vase, the mockery, the whispers through the vent. All the small cracks had led here to this moment. And I realized something important. Sometimes silence isn't patience. Sometimes silence is preparation. I tucked Henry's fountain pen into my pocket, close to my heart. It no longer felt like a relic. It felt like a weapon. The next day, I paid a quiet visit to Mary, my neighbor. She had always been observant, always quick to notice small things others missed. Over tea in her kitchen, I asked softly, "Mary, did you see Grace here last week?" "When I was away." Mary hesitated, then nodded. "She was here late. With her husband. People came and went." I didn't want to pry, but, "Lorraine, I thought you knew." I smiled faintly, though my chest ached. "Thank you. That's all I needed." Mary's words would be useful later. An ally. A witness. That evening, I hosted a small dinner of my own. Just Grace and her husband. I cooked slowly, deliberately, the smell of roasted chicken filling the house. They sat at the table, chatting as though nothing was amiss. I poured their wine with steady hands, smiling faintly. Grace didn't notice how my eyes lingered on her, how my silence held weight. She mistook it for submission. She didn't realize she was already eating in a house that no longer belonged to her. As I cleared the dishes, I thought, revenge doesn't always arrive with noise. Sometimes it slips in with the quiet clink of silverware. Later, I walked to the study, shutting the door gently behind me. The night was still, the air heavy with the scent of lavender polish and old wood. I spread the documents across the desk, each line of Henry's trust firming my resolve. I wasn't only protecting bricks and wood. I was protecting memory, sacrifice, love. They thought they had caged me, but I was already building the key. The trap was set. All I had to do now was wait for them to step into it. The day of the dinner arrived with skies washed in gray, clouds pressing low over the house. I brewed my tea slowly, letting the steam curl upward, steadying myself with each sip. Tonight wasn't about food or laughter. Tonight was about truth. I invited Grace and her husband under the pretense of a family meal. Just the three of us. I'd said over the phone, my voice soft, almost apologetic. Grace had agreed easily, sounding smug, as though she believed I was finally surrendering to her way of things. By evening, the dining room was warm with candlelight. I set the table carefully, china polished, Henry's silver laid out, a modest bouquet of roses from the garden in the center. It looked simple, intimate, almost ordinary. But nothing about this night was ordinary. Grace swept in wearing a silk blouse, her husband trailing behind with the same quiet eyes. She kissed my cheek quickly, her perfume strong, filling the room with a sharp sweetness that turned my stomach. "This is nice," she said, glancing around. "Maybe your last dinner in this house, I smiled faintly, folding my hands. "Sit. Eat. Let's enjoy the evening." Dinner passed with polite conversation. I served roast chicken, green beans, and Henry's favorite cornbread. They chatted about work, about friends. Grace laughed loudly, filling the air with her confidence. She thought she had one. When the plates were nearly empty, I rose and returned with a tray. On it sat 3 teacups and a sealed envelope. Grace frowned. "What's this?" I set the envelope in front of her, sliding it across the table with deliberate calm. The paper whispered against the cloth as it moved. Her husband leaned forward. "What's going on?" Grace's smile wavered. "Mom." I sat back down, folding my cardigan neatly in my lap. My voice was steady. "You've spent weeks talking about this house as though it's yours. About my life as though it's something you can rearrange. But you should know, it isn't yours to discuss anymore." Her brow furrowed. She snatched up the envelope, tearing it open with impatient fingers. As her eyes scanned the first lines, her face paled. This says the property's been transferred to a trust," she stammered. "Yes," I said quietly. "Henry's trust. And mine. Locked down. You can't touch it." Her husband reached for the papers, scanning them quickly. His mouth tightened. Grace looked at me, her voice rising. "When did you do this?" "Before you had the chance to take it from me," I replied. The room grew still, the only sound the faint ticking of the clock on the mantel. Grace's laughter had vanished. Her confidence had cracked. "You can't do this to me," she snapped, her cheeks flushed. I held her gaze, unflinching. "I didn't do this to you, Grace. You did this to yourself." Every cruel word, every plan whispered behind my back. "You thought I was weak. But you forgot. I was the one who gave you everything you have." Her husband placed a hand on her arm, murmuring, "Grace, enough." But she shook him off, glaring at me with a fury I'd never seen before. For the first time in weeks, I felt taller than my years, stronger than the cardigan wrapped around me. I wasn't the woman she mocked anymore. I was the woman who had survived storms she couldn't imagine. I lifted my teacup, letting the steam warm my face. My voice was calm, almost soft. "You may have forgotten who I am, Grace. But I haven't." She pushed back from the table abruptly, the chair scraping harshly against the floor. "This isn't over." I sipped my tea, unbothered. "No, it isn't. This is only the beginning." The silence that followed was thick, charged. Grace's husband stared at me, eyes full of something like guilt. Grace's hand shook as she clutched the papers, as though holding them could somehow change what they said. But nothing she did now could undo it. "Tell me, if your own child tried to erase you, would you stay silent and endure, or would you quietly take everything back?" Their voices rose in panic, but mine stayed quiet, because the real storm hadn't even begun yet. The week after that dinner was heavy with silence. Grace didn't call. She didn't storm back in. She waited. I knew her well enough to sense what was coming. She wasn't the type to retreat. She was the type to escalate. And escalate she did. On Thursday morning, I received a polite letter from the bank, requesting my presence regarding recent inquiries made on my property trust. The words were formal, but I could read between the lines. Grace had tried to move against me again. I buttoned my cardigan and tucked Henry's fountain pen into my bag, a quiet reminder of strength. When I arrived at the bank, the air inside was cool, carrying the faint scent of polished wood and paper. People sat in chairs along the lobby, waiting for their names to be called. To my surprise, Grace was already there. She stood near the counter, her posture proud, her smile rehearsed. Her husband lingered by her side, but his expression was tight, uneasy. "Mother," she said smoothly, as though the dinner had never happened, "I asked the bank to clarify a few things. There's been some confusion." I nodded once. "Yes. Let's clarify." We were led into a private meeting room. The banker, a woman named Ellen who'd known Henry, greeted us warmly. "Mrs. Carter," she said, shaking my hand firmly. Then her eyes flicked to Grace, polite but cooler. Grace wasted no time. "My mother has been under a lot of stress lately," she began, her voice carrying that same practiced pity she'd used before. "I just want to make sure everything regarding the deed is in order. She sometimes forgets." "Stop," I said, my voice sharper than even I expected. The room fell silent. Grace blinked, startled. "I forget nothing," I continued, my tone steady. "What you forget, Grace, is that this house was built on sacrifice. On nights your father and I went without so you could have everything. On years of work you never even noticed. That is what you forget." Her lips parted, but before she could answer, Ellen spoke. "Actually, there's no confusion. The property trust was updated last week. Everything is secure under Lorraine's name. No alterations can be made without her consent. Ever." Grace's face drained of color. "That's not possible." "She can't." "She can," Ellen interrupted firmly. "And she did." Her husband shifted uncomfortably, his hand pressing to his forehead. The silence in the room grew unbearable, except for the faint scratching of Ellen's pen as she signed the confirmation papers. Grace turned to me then, her mask shattering. "You did this to me," she hissed. I met her eyes without flinching. "No. You did this to yourself." Her voice rose, shrill now. "You're destroying our future." I felt my cardigan against my arms, soft and steady. My tea-warmed breath steadied my reply. "You destroyed our family the moment you chose greed over love. Her husband muttered almost under his breath, "She's right, Grace." The look Grace shot him was venomous, but the damage was done. The banker, the staff nearby, even the neighbor Mary who had come to notarize papers, all of them had seen it. Grace was no longer in control. I stood slowly, gathering the documents Ellen handed me. The room felt lighter, though my chest still ached with the quiet grief of what had been lost. As I walked toward the door, Grace called after me, her voice cracking. "You'll regret this, Mother." I paused, my hand resting on the frame. I turned just enough to meet her eyes. "I regret only one thing, that I raised you to believe respect was optional." Then I stepped out, leaving her voice to crumble behind me. "Tell me, when your own child betrays you in public, is it better to fight for them, or to finally fight for yourself?" And as the doors closed behind me, I felt the house I had protected exhale, as though Henry himself had been waiting for this moment. The house was mine again, not because of bricks or deeds or signatures on paper, but because its silence no longer felt hostile. It breathed with me. Every floorboard, every window pane seemed to release the tension it had been holding since Grace first began circling it like prey. I stayed there for several more weeks, but I knew I couldn't linger forever. The memories weighed too heavy. Every room held echoes: Henry's laugh at the dinner table, Grace's little feet racing up the stairs, the sound of lullabies I used to hum at night. This house had been a cradle for love, and then a battlefield for betrayal. It was time for me to step away. With Mr. Hensley's help, I found a smaller place on the edge of town. A sunny cottage with wide windows and a little sunroom that filled with morning light. The first day I moved in, I carried Henry's photograph in one hand and my cardigan folded neatly in the other. That was all I needed. The cottage smelled of fresh paint and pine floors. I filled it slowly, not with things but with peace. A rocking chair by the window, my knitting basket, shelves lined with old books and Henry's fountain pen resting atop them. No clutter, no battles. Just space to breathe. On the second morning I brewed my tea in a chipped blue mug, letting the steam rise in soft curls. For weeks I had left tea to grow cold in my hands, the warmth stolen by grief. Now as I sipped it was hot, soothing, alive against my lips. I thought of Henry and smiled. Neighbors introduced themselves quickly. A woman named Clara brought fresh scones. A young man across the street offered to trim the hedges. They didn't see me as fragile or outdated. They saw me as part of the neighborhood. Person. That was enough. Grace never called. Not after the bank, not after the will was sealed. I heard, through whispers, that she and her husband had moved to a rental house in the city. Perhaps she blamed me. Perhaps she blamed herself. But blame no longer concerned me. Her husband sent a letter once, plain and short. "I'm sorry, Mom." That was all it said. I didn't write back, but I folded it and tucked it into Henry's ledger. Not for forgiveness. For record. For memory. Sometimes I still ache when I think of her. Of the little girl who painted flowers on my cardigan, who once begged me never to leave her. That child lives only in memory now. The woman she became chose another path, one I can't walk with her. But grief no longer controls me. I've made peace with the truth. Love without respect cannot survive. On quiet evenings, I sit in my sunroom with Henry's photo on the side table. The roses outside bloom gently against the window, their scent drifting in on warm breezes. I sip my tea, knit slowly, and watch the world move in its patient rhythm. Sometimes I whisper softly as though Henry can hear. We protected it. We protected me. And in those moments I don't feel like a woman who lost. I feel like a woman who remembered her worth. Because in the end it wasn't about the house. It wasn't about money or property or walls. It was about dignity. About standing tall when others try to make you small. About reminding yourself who you are when the world, even your own blood, tries to erase you. Family isn't defined by blood. Family is who treats you with love, with respect, with dignity. Money can build a house, but it cannot build a home. I sip the last of my tea warm in my hands. The cardigan rests folded in the cedar chest nearby, no longer my armor. Just a relic of love, of pain, of survival. I lean back, the sunlight gentle on my face, and I whisper. I didn't just save my house. I saved myself.